Hey everyone, Eggman here with another video, and we've got this week's version of the TCG Matchmaking OP09 weekly power rankings, which I'm excited to go over. This is also right before the One Piece North American Finals, which is going to be a really high stakes tournament. A lot of people are grinding pretty hard for it. There's a really good prize for the first place as well, being able to qualify for Worlds, so I know a lot of people are trying to get that themselves. So I do want to kind of give a little bit of my thoughts going on into that event too, and just kind of my predictions based on the data that we've had and what I've seen from other events as well. And I'm also going to have an updated tier list at the end of this, since even though we haven't had a lot of events, we've pretty much had this format for the last month, which means a lot of people have been testing, and I've been kind of able to develop my thoughts more accurately with that data as well. So if you guys want any of the deck list or anything that we're going over, you can make sure to check out my website, Eggman Events, which is linked in the description. Again, thank you to TCG Matchmaking for providing this data. You can check out their Patreon as well. And if you want to check out any other events for the OP09 meta, you can make sure to check out my website as well. But jumping on into this one, we do have the power rankings, and I do want to mention again that their rating system is based off a function of not only win rate, but also based on matches and a couple other factors as well. They have explained what the complete rating for it is, but I do like what they have, because they, you see at the bottom here, Nami has a 54.7% win rate, but it had less than 1,000 matches for their for the leader during the ranked kind of meta. So because of that, or for at least the last week, so because of that, it does have a high win rate, but since it's not as played right now, I think it's something that kind of affects the placing for it too. It just means that the number and the win rate is a little bit more volatile compared to something like Dofi, which had 10 times as more matches during the same kind of period as well. But Doflamingo's been the top of this meta for quite a bit. Rob Lucci's been right behind it as well. There's been a little bit of a shakeup between three. I think Shanks was in that position for quite a while, and you'll notice that the win rate for it's dropped down a little bit to 49.3%. I do think this is a mix of people testing out the leader for the first time, so there are some newer people on it in the first place, but I also think people are adjusting their play styles to how to beat Shanks. It is a little bit of a like matchup knowledge deck and knowing when to swing 5 or 6. Its defensive leader mechanic is something I think people are adjusting to as well, so that's kind of why I think it's dropped down a little bit. We also have Black and Yellow Luffy being at 51.9% win rate with an 8.18 rating. I think this deck is really strong right now. A lot of people kind of dropped it off at the end of OP08 with Teach being around. That's like the first time it's had like a really bad matchup in this meta that's, was expected to be very popular in its own way. However, I think Teach has been more of a is not as like open ended as like something like Rob Lucci, right? Rob Lucci, I think a lot of people are on it, and it's pretty open ended for how to play it. Teach is really specific. It's a very tight deck list to play and to be able to pilot properly, and because of that, I think less people are going to be on it than in particular for it. So it is going to be around, and you do see that it is bumping up a little bit better this week, but it is such a difficult deck to play and so specific that I don't think it's as popular as other decks. You'll see it just had 4,000 people playing it for this past week, and it had a 48.3% win rate. We have decks like Betty getting a little bit more popular with a 51.7. Again, it only had 1,000 matches, so not super good data compared to other things. This number is pretty volatile comparatively, but it is around, and I know a lot of people who do trust the deck right now too. Star Deck 10 Luffy, my favorite deck in this format, going down a couple spots as well. I think more people are testing it out, but it does have a pretty rough match win rate. And then we have Anel and Nami bumping up into this bottom 10 here. And we also don't have Bonnie, which I was really surprised to not see crack into this top 10 this week either. It's been doing pretty well tournament wise, and but it hasn't been, I think, as popular, which is I think really interesting as well. So these are the power rankings, and then jump into the leader matchups too. You can check out again this whole chart if you guys want to. This is a lot of data to go through, but you do see, like, I think Doflamingo is highest played deck right now and has a high win rate. I think your only rough matchups are Lucci. I think is a little bit more present than at the beginning of the format, and it is it does have enough removal to keep pace with Doflamingo a lot of the time, which is very strong. Then other than that, like BY is a little bit of a negative, and Nell is pretty negative, which I think is more present as usual. And then with Bonnie a little bit less present this week, I think that's something that affects it. We also have Shanks here being able to get some good matchups across the board, having a little bit of a negative but winnable matchup into Doflamingo and Purple Luffy. In general, I think like against the other kind of best decks, and I would say like the top 5 kind of area, Shanks can win and lose against everything. You'll notice that all of its matchups are pretty they're not really swingy, right? They're all within like 10% either way. And because of that, I think Shanks is really strong at being able to win any game, but at the same token, it can lose every game too because of that. Because there's nothing that's like a super overwhelming like success or like highly rated matchup into it. It's just kind of even across the board, which I think is strong, but also can be a little bit frustrating at times. We have Rob Lucci, which I would say is probably our second best deck in this format, not only based off like the power rankings, but I do agree that it's got a lot of great matchups into us. Teach is our only rough one, but again, it's not as present as I think people were thinking, mostly because it has such an abysmal win rate into Dofi. Like a 27.2% win rate into Dofi is so bad. It's something that I think will keep a lot of decks in check. It's also why I think Betty is not as popular and Nami. Like since based on events that I've done, you know, Doflamingo is at least a quarter of the meta. So 1 in 4 matchups just winning, like losing immediately, I think is pretty tough. And that's also exponentially the farther you go into a tournament. I think there are more and more undefeated Doflamingo players that you're going to likely run into as well. So because of that, I do think that some decks, if you have like a abysmal win rate against Doflamingo, that will affect a lot of your matchups and your chances to win a lot of ways. And because of that, I think that does affect Nami, Betty, as well as something like Purple Luffy and Teach as well. So Purple Luffy, though, I do think it can be winnable. It's just like you're racing them, and you feel really bad whenever you use your leader effect because you don't want to be at less life for the only thing you're getting is like the extra Dawn, which is pretty tough when they're able to spam out as many bodies without having to lose the hand size, the Dawn, or really anything else. Teach is mentioned. It is a bit of I'd say like this is kind of like a gatekeeper into this format right now. The fact that it does have like a good thing into Lucci is great, but the rest of like the top 4 decks or so, it does not have like super winning matchups. I think like Shanks and Purple Luffy are winnable, but again, like 27.2 against Doflamingo is so rough for the deck. Again, we have Red Purple Luffy, which I like this deck too. It is kind of like a riskier version of Shanks, but I do think like late game you get a lot of consistency, which is really nice. I do think it's a really tough deck to play consistently and well into this format. So but I do think like there are like a lot of like matchups where you're just like a little bit disadvantaged, which we can see with like Doflamingo and Rob Lucci. But I think like people think this matchup is like trash because you're only at 3 life, but it's not as difficult to kind of stabilize and get some advantage from that, which I don't think a lot of people kind of recognize, which is really interesting. Other than that, I think the deck is really great. I do like my Red Purple Luffy. We see Black and Yellow Luffy as well, doing well into kind of the other 3 decks in top 3, right? Being able to do well into Doflamingo, Shanks, as well as Rob Lucci. We do have tough matchups into Purple Luffy since it is so aggressive and fast, and also Teach, which I think this deck is a little bit less popular, but Purple Luffy is a little bit more popular, so that does affect it. But again, like having like positive win rates like this into these 3 decks, I think does show a lot of potential for BY Luffy to do well in this weekend. We have Enel, which kind of like the inverse has a really good Doflamingo matchup, and then has a passable matchup into Rob Lucci right now, which is a little bit interesting because I do know like Ice Age just removes like most cards that you're going to be playing with it, but having a bad matchup into Shanks as well as Purple Luffy and Teach, I think will be a little bit tough for the deck in a more open field. But again, like if you're playing a deck that has a good matchup in a Doflamingo, you can just high roll and play only Dofi all day, and you will get rewarded for it. So I think that's strong. And then we have Betty and Nami. These are both they've got really positive win rates again. Like these are both like above 50% for this past week with 51.7 as well as 54.7 respectively. But I do think like the Doflamingo matchup is pretty tough, and that makes it really difficult to play these in a more open field for it. But you do have like good matchups into Shanks. Rob Lucci has a hard time into Nami, but not as against Betty. Betty has a hard time into Rob Lucci, and then you can kind of see them flip flop for these other top leaders here. But I do think like both these leaders are good and do have some really polarizing matchups. So if you go against your good matchups, you're in a good spot, and if you go against your bad matchups, you're in a bad spot. So I don't know. I think like these can do well, but they're really matchup dependent, which you really can't control that well as much. So anyways, those are kind of the matchups, and let's go into the topping deck lists. All right, and we're going to go through these deck lists pretty quick, but I do want to go over them in the first place. I also do have in the corner the games and win rates for these specifically based on the TCG matchmaking stats. These are the highest win rate decks with at least 50 games in their 1 million plus bounties. So that's just kind of the idea for this. I won't say that these are the best decks in the game right now, but I think these give you a really good spot to where to start, or at least play against, to kind of see the range of some of these decks too. But I do think some of these do have some pretty specific techs, which we'll go over as we see them. And we'll start off with the Doflamingo, which we pretty much know what this deck looks like, right? This one had 58 games with a 67% win rate. The techs that I see from this one are the copies of Red Rock as well as 2 copies of Tiger. Tiger, I think, is less of a tech option, but Red Rock, I do like having 1 or 2 copies in the deck itself. There are some matchups where they can kind of stabilize in the late game. So by having this Red Rock, you can get rid of anything, which is really strong, such as even like getting rid of like a 10 cost Teach. Not that that matchup's particularly difficult for you, but like if you're playing as Bonnie, there's like an 8-drop Kid you can get removal for it. So I don't know. I like the Red Rock, and I do think there's some good spots for it too. Other than that, we kind of know what this deck looks like, right? It's like 45 cards, the same for most people. Femur, I think most people are playing 2 copies of it right now. So because you see one, if your opponent like uses one or uses like the trigger for one, either they have no counter or they have a second one for next turn. So always kind of keep that in mind, because I think again most people are playing 2, and then the rest of the deck is pretty standard. So not much to say, but there's Doflamingo. And then next up we do have Rob Lucci. So this one had a 57% win rate against 52 games, and which is kind of low for what I would expect. There's a lot of different builds for Rob Lucci, I think, that are trying to go their best that they can across the field. I think that Kaido is generally most people are playing this card. The fact that it is a kind of -1 is a little bit tough at times when having to discard an additional card for the activate main effect, but it does help you if you are afraid of something like Teach. You can do like Ice Age Kaido to get rid of their 10 cost, which is really, really nice because it plays around, since this is an activate main and not an on play. Soap Sheep, I think, is a great tech for Doflamingo because it does let you, with your leader effect and Rob Lucci 4-drop, get rid of 2 4-drops, which is really viable for the Doflamingo matchup. It's really interesting to see Sabo at 1 copy. It used to be kind of like, I think, the unremovable card against a lot of matchups in like OP07 and OP08, and now it's just like sometimes you get a cycle with it. There's just better cards than it right now, which is, I think, a little bit wild. And then we've got Brook, which I think is one of the best removal cards for this deck. This version's only playing 3. I think you got to play 3 or 4 copies of it. Like 4 just seems correct most times, but if you need more room for like either 2Ks or more cost reductions, I can understand that as well. But I think Rob Lucci's going to be around quite a bit. I think this is like the most teched version of the deck, where we have just so many different options. We have the Jack, we have the Kaido, we have the Soap Sheep, we have just so much additional removal cards that I think that you're going a little bit wider than taller, and that can help you, but sometimes it means that there's less consistency against your good matchups too. But this is the Rob Lucci build as well. And then next up we've got Purple Luffy. This is 101 games with a 65% win rate, which is pretty dang good for that. And generally I think like this deck has more games because it's so quick, right? Like you were just churning through your games. The fact that this is a deck that just goes, you either lose quickly or win quickly. That's kind of how it is in a lot of ways. One thing I will say is that I do like the Linlin for this deck right now too. The fact that this helps you just get like another turn against the Doflamingo, which is great when you already have like a bunch of 7 cost and 8 cost and 9 cost out, especially like the new Secret Rare, which I think is good to play on curve in this deck. That helps out the deck quite a bit. Giant is I'm going to say broken card. I think this card is broken right now. It's just so good. It just lets you it does everything you need on a defensive card. Like generally like either cycling or getting out of attack, but being able to get an attack without any consequence really 9 times out of 10 is just so strong for what this deck is doing when it's so aggressive. It's like when Zoro used to play like Rad Beam in OP03. You could be so aggressive because if they're trying to go for game, you have also just the best and freest like defensive card in a lot of ways. So other than that, I think this deck is solid. It's interesting to not see Queen, but we're playing Useless Kid, but we do have the Onami for that 1 cycle. Most of our deck isn't like really terrible to have in hand either, because we're in late game. We want to play our 7s and 9s, so we get that there as well. But I don't know, I think Purple Luffy is going to be good. If you have a good way to approach the Blue Doflamingo matchup, I think you're in a good spot with this. This is probably the most consistent this deck has ever been, but you are still a little bit needing to play this on curve. So if you don't see that, you are, 1 step behind a lot of the time. But I do think this is a really functional deck right now. So there you go. All right, next up we got the Black and Yellow Luffy. So this had only 54 games with this version of it, but it did have a 70% win rate, which is pretty good in like kind of the field that we're going into. And I do think that is mostly because it has such a good matchup into the spread of Doflamingo, Shanks, and the Rob Lucci, which if you look based on just numbers for those decks, those are the three most popular decks. Purple Luffy's like a little bit more popular, but those three I think is the majority of the ladder right now. So having a win rate, a high win rate against those, I don't think is too outrageous because those are your better matchups and you're seeing those more often, which is impactful. So one thing I will say is that most people aren't playing the 2-drop and set 5 cost Ace, but we did find room for it this one. Raigo's been a pretty solid card. The Flame Split's a really interesting card too. Being able to give you something plus 1k as well as resting something if your opponent has 2 or less life. So it's probably to play around like Rebecca and other blockers, but I do think the Flame Split's an interesting choice for the deck. And then we have the rest of it here. So I think this deck is in an okay spot. It's going to be good into the top 3. I think outside of those, you're going to have some kind of more polarizing matchups, but again, I think being able to have a positive win rate into over 50% of the field is super strong, and a lot of people will be doing well with it this weekend. So there is the BY Luffy. And then next up, we've got Shanks. So this one has 61 games with a 67.2% win rate. So that's actually pretty dang high for a deck like this, where most of the matchups I feel are akin to a coin toss. For this build in specifics, one little tech card I saw was the Round Table. This is a set 1 event. One of your opponent's characters gets minus 10k power during this turn. So you do have to kind of sink an attack into it still, but it's essentially removal on anything as long as it's rested, or you are able to put something into Marco range. So it's a 2 cost 9 Dawn play, but being able to get rid of anything that doesn't have protection with Marco and Round Table does feel pretty good, especially as a 5 life leader that's more defensive. So you do get your little trades there, which I think is nice. You really can't kind of sequence this with anything else, especially since we aren't playing anything like Newgate or anything. Like all of our removals are just like the time you play it, right? So we have like Silvers as well as the Ben Beckman, but I think both those are strong. Shanks also just being able to get removal of anything 10k or less is pretty good. There's not a lot, but there are some 12Ks that exist. And then we just have our like lineup of 2Ks and more defensive cards too. But I think Shanks is going to do well this weekend as well. It's going to be interesting to see if Roundtable makes it into any of the topping lists, but it's going to be around, and you do have to kind of make sure you know how this matchup works as well. All right, next up we've got Teach, and this is 61 games with a 67% win rate. So 2/3 win rate again is pretty just below it is pretty good. The tech card I see from this one is the Tempest Kick, which I think kind of makes sense for this deck, and the fact that we discard so many cards so quickly, our trash really fills up, and we have reasons to want to with cards like Burgess as well. So just having like a cycle that also lets you get rid of it is strong. I know a lot of people are on the fence if full led the stage is worth being played in this deck, and I haven't tested enough personally to have a really cemented idea with it, but I do think like this is potentially like just a discard for consistency. So if you're rolling really high, you don't need this card, but I do think this is something that more and more people are kind of looking into, just how much they need it in the first place. So I think 4 is probably too many. I think a lot of people have been going to 2 or 3 copies if they are running the card in general, but the fact that you have to just place it, it's kind of tough. It does help you find 10 costs, back to back in the late game, if they happen to be at the top of your deck. But I do think it's a little bit that -1 hand cost, or the -1 you do by playing it, does kind of catch up to you at the end of the game, where every card in your hand counts. So we'll see what those look like. I think Teach is in a pretty good spot for this meta in general. It is very, very tough though into Doflamingo, which stinks for it, and it is something that you have to play really particular to do well with it. But which is going to be kind of hard in like a room with the best players in the game, and on top of having to play like 7, 8, 9 rounds perfectly with it. Someone might be able to do it. I know it won't be me. I know it can't be me, but I think someone will be able to try to do that and find some success. So we'll have to see if that's true or not. But this is the Teach build. And then next up, we've got Betty. Again, this is an aggro build, so we see that this had a lot more games with 114 with a 68.4% win rate, which is honestly a little bit higher than I was expecting for a deck like this, where we're so aggressive. Our game is really kind of decided. Like the win rate in my mind is that if the first card we trigger off of life, or our first life is a trigger, that changes how the game works so immensely, which is kind of wild to think about. The fact that if we get a free body off our life, we have another like 7 8k attack, which just lets us win the game, and if we don't see that, then we lose, kind of thing. So I think that's something that's impactful for this deck. It's hard to set it up consistently, but if you do, you get so much advantage, and you're able to kind of overwhelm your opponent. One thing I will say is that I do like the copies of Dragon in this build right now. I think this is something that I didn't see immediately from the get-go from this format. It's a Revolution Army. The fact that it lets you be an 8-drop 9k with Rush that gives 2 Dawn to something else, which makes it a 7k. Like, obviously, it's supposed to work with the Revolution Army stuff, and it does really well, but I do like that it's being added to Betty, and I hope more people try it out. As well. So other than that, I saw some people test Sabo. It's not in this build. The new Koala is fine because it lets you play another body as well as just be a blocker too. So I think this deck is really good. I think it's in a good spot. And I expect it to kind of top, which we'll talk about in the tier list, but not, I don't know. It's something that's going to be pretty tough to be consistent with, I think, in every game. So this is the build for Betty. And then next up, we've got the red and purple Luffy. And this is a pretty different build from what I've been testing personally. This had 87 games with a 62.1% win rate. The builds that I've been testing have been mostly kind of focusing on ramping to the 10 cost Shanks card that we got of OP09. I've seen a lot of people tell me that I'm wrong for not playing OP09 Newgate, or sorry, the 9-drop Newgate, since being, it helps you out so much in the Doflamingo matchup because it lets you be an 8k leader, which is tough for them to interact with on the turn you play it. But it's really interesting to see this like super aggressive version of it as well. So kind of the main things to kind of point out is that our ramp is just Zorojoro and the Bon Clay. We have like the Frankie as our blocker of choice. We don't have the Queen, which is additionally interesting. But we can play this for 4, and then we technically played it for 3. There's a neat little combo you can do with this Frankie where you lose 2. So if you're at 10, your opponent's at 10, you go down to 8. You use your Sanji's effect to play this for 3 because you do have 8 Dawn to 4. So you have 1 Dawn left open, and then you can use your leader effect to get the Dawn back to go from 8 to 9. So that's a little bit helpful, I think, for the deck too. It helps you out quite a bit. You also can play like 2 Sanjis if you need to, which some scenarios you do rather have like 3 blockers out than having like just 1 with the 1 for Gum Gum Giant. This deck takes advantage of Gum Gum Giant unlike any other, since we are a 6k leader, and then also like our late game like consistency, being able to draw 2 and cycle into our next end game spot, I think is great. I didn't play a lot of the Sanji at first, but I think this is really impactful for this deck. The fact that we're able to use this on curve, like so if we are at 7 Dawn, so let's say we go second, we go from 4 to 5, we start a turn, we go to 7, we can use the Sanji's effect to play it. We use the Dawn minus to rush something and attack into it, and then after that we go from 6 to 8, we can use our leader effect to go to 9, and then at 9 we can play something like the Monkey D. Luffy, we can play Dragon, and then also have like a Dawn open. We can even play the Silver's Rayleigh, which I wasn't expecting this card in the deck, but I do think it can help us a lot in the Doflamingo matchup specifically, which I think is really interesting, and it's kind of our only removal outside of like the attack with Sanji after you rest something strategy. But I think this deck is good. We also have the Beckman too, which helps us get some removal, and I have to try this out. Every week you'll notice that there's a different topping list for RP Luffy, and they all seem really interesting. So again, if I was playing in this weekend, I would definitely be playing this deck, at least this leader, not this deck necessarily. But it's really cool to see how many different builds just exist for it, and it's been, again, my favorite deck to play right now. So there we go. All right, next up we've got the Enel. So this had 59 games, but it had a 75% win rate, and I think like majority it's because, again, our best matchup is Doflamingo. It's a 69% almost win rate for us, and because of that, if we played a lot against a lot of Doflamingo, we're gonna find a lot of success with it. So when it is the most present leader in this meta, by almost the rest of it outside of Shanks, which is really popular, which I think we also have like pretty okay matchup into Shanks, right? Yeah, not too bad. We're 42%. Like if they don't find their 10 dropline curve, I would imagine we win a lot of the time. But not a lot has changed since OP08. I think the biggest changes are the Darashi, which we're able to use this to draw 2, which at 3 Dawn, we don't have a lot of other things to do, so that's great. It also has a trigger, so we can use like Nami to get rid of it. For removal, or if we trigger it off life, it's just a cycle, so it's never dead in hand. Kuzan also, on play, you can place one of your opponent's cost 3 or lower characters on top or bottom of their life face up. Your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. So I can expect this to be in a lot, a good thing in a lot of matchups. Also, like a weird thing into like BY. You can find like this seems like if you want to beat BY, this is a really good card at doing so. This also can help you get rid of like Brook in like the Rob Lucci matchup, and just like a lot of other things kind of fall into this kind of spot for Kuzan. So I think that's great that this card I think also helps you, and it's a cool little card for a deck like this where you're trying to grind into the late game. And then the rest we have like a 0 cost. We have 2 Amaru and then also Raigo. So this is a bit of a different build from what I've been seeing lately for Enel, and it's going to be interesting to see how it does on the North American stage. So we'll see that with Enel. And then lastly we have Nami. This had 71 games with a 60% win rate. Again, this has such a rough matchup into the Doflamingo. It has a 27% win rate across our data, and it's such a there's a reason why, right? It's such a defensive deck, and Doflamingo does not really care. It just produces so many 5Ks attacks so easily that you just kind of have to respect the amount of pressure that they have. So you do have like a card that helps out the deck a lot though from OP09, like the first support card in a while. When attacking, be able to look top 5 to get a blue event card. It just means like your opponent kind of has to attack into this or remove it later, which sometimes this eats up an attack and draws you a card, which is really good. But other than that, I think Nami's pretty much the same. I kind of expect it to. There's a good chance in my mind for it to top and get to day 2 for our Card Fest finals, just because Nami is just always kind of shown up for the last kind of 6 months. But it's not something that I think is particularly strong in this meta, and I think this is one of the worst metas for it in the recent times. But it still can present itself, and it's still going to be in a good spot. So that's the Nami build, and let's go to my tier list to end out this video. All right, and here's my tier list going into the North American finals. Real quick, the kind of tiers are best deck and format, which is Doflamingo. Spoilers, not. I don't think anyone's going to contest this. Will top, which is going to be decks that I expect to see in the top day 2 part of the event. Can top are ones that I would not be surprised if they did. And then Bubble, these are ones that I think are going to be. These can get a winning record, like an X2 record, to get into the top. And it just depends if they have their tiebreakers there or if they have like a really good day. But like just like a little bit of a tier under that. And then other than that, the rest is kind of everything else. So anything that's not here, I don't expect to top. This is my personal opinions. Your guys' can change, but these are the ones that I think have a chance with kind of varying kind of difficulty, right? So best deck in the format, Doflamingo. Rob Lucci, second best, pretty clearly in my mind. We have Shanks, Purple Luffy, and BY. BY might move left as the format goes along, but I'm going to keep it right here at the end point. Maybe it's better than Purple Luffy. I'll leave it here. I'll say it's better than Purple Luffy, but we'll see how it does. Shanks, I think, is really present, but it's getting a little bit worse every week. Can top Bonnie. I think this deck is a little bit slept on in this format. I think it has a lot of good matchups and can do very well. Teach, someone's going to do well with it. I don't know who it's going to be, but there's going to be a lot of people who will be trying it. Maybe not as Rob Lucci, Shanks, and anything else above it, but I do think there are people who have committed to trying out this deck, and they're going to have a good shot with it. We have Enel and Nami, which I think these ones will kind of have a pretty good chance to go into this one, just because it has like a really good matchup into Doflamingo, and Nami because it has really good matchups into like Lucci, BY, and Shanks as well. So that kind of inversely helps each other. And then Bubble, I think Betty is, again, like the consistency isn't here, but like when it does well, it smokes your opponent, right? Like they never had a shot. RP Luffy because I'm coping. Black and Purple Luffy because I know a lot of people in testing this out, and maybe someone found a build that really works with them. Smoker, I think it's worse Rob Lucci, but I think it is still really good, so people might be using this. Katakuri and Zoro kind of more aggressive, and also Nika Robin kind of more like just aggressive decks as well. And then we do have kind of bring up the rear, we got Foxy. I know this is a deck that not a lot of people are on, but the people who are really committed to it. It topped a couple times in the Japanese OP09 format, and I think someone might be able to be crazy enough to go for. I always feel like every large event, I always hear like, oh, this is the top placing, top 64 Foxy. So I kind of expect one this weekend as well. But again, these are my opinions. These are not like hard tiers either. If you guys think that some things need to move up or down, or there's a leader that I disrespected and didn't put on this tier list, let me know. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback and responses too. But that's going to be it. I hope you guys enjoy your weekend. If you're at Card Fest, if you're watching from home like I am, and I'm looking forward to seeing what takes it as well. So that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.